So Leo, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today. I feel like I've known you forever, but I've only met you once. so,
Sure.
uh, so for the benefit of our listeners and viewers today, just to give some context, so you've just moved to Australia. You have joined a fintech business here in Sydney, and we were working together for it must have been what close to 7 months through the whole process.
I think so. Yeah, I didn't think it would be such an extensive process in a way, but time flies and you sort out your documents, you sort out everything, and then you just kind of wait. But
Yeah.
it just, yeah, it's funny how, like at the time, I thought, man, this takes a long time, and then actually looking back, it was quite fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and also like it was it's one of those things, right? It's out of your hands, but there were lots of hoops to jump through because you were coming from Holland, where there are lots of rules there that we kind of didn't expect at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so look, we'll go through a lot today, but I like to start with your career before Salesforce because it gives a good people a good kind of idea of what they cannot go on to become if they're not necessarily the stereotypical like technology person or whatnot. So, what did you do before you were a Salesforce professional?
So I started my career in business. I did have the business degree, and I worked in business for about 3 years, 3.5 years, and did a combination of internships as well as some jobs in permanent positions. So I did kind of a little bit of everything. I did a little bit of finance. I worked in a purchase department. I worked in sales and marketing. I worked in a shop, like in one of those college programs that you go abroad and you just get a chance to learn a bit more of English and get in touch with different cultures. Just a little bit of everything, but everything in the business side. I don't actually have any technical background before getting into Salesforce.
Sure, which is really interesting because, and we'll discuss this soon, but I would class you as pretty technical in that your skill set is quite broad across different Salesforce languages, Salesforce and non-Salesforce. So it's really interesting that you've come through that background. But what first attracted you to Salesforce, and how did you kind of make your leap into that space?
I kind of like, to be honest, I kind of fell into Salesforce, so it wasn't like I was initially attracted to it. A few years ago, I was living in Ireland then. I was doing a master's in Ireland, and it was one of those things like met a girl. It's like I'm not sure if I'm gonna stay. I still had a job in Brazil or a job I could go to, and I was like maybe I'll stay. And then I started interviewing. Just say maybe this relationship will go somewhere. So I'll stay. I'll give it a shot, but I need a job. I just can't stay here without work. So what I did, I applied for a job at a place that they were looking for tech support. So a tech support agent who could speak Portuguese and Spanish, and
Sure.
somebody just pick up the calls, and they were like, they were very vague in the description, and they just said we also need somebody who speaks these two languages, can start immediately, and enjoys technology. And I went for the interview. I was like, this could be something I could do. And they were like, do you know Salesforce? And I was like, no, I don't. Just give me a job, whatever. I'll do really well. I'll do my best. But I just want to stay in the country.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the job was for a company that was Salesforce outsourced all of their operations in Europe at the time for tech support. So I actually worked indirectly for Salesforce.
Okay.
That was
Okay. Cool.
my and my initial job was actually, it was just taking calls. Just, hey, what is your issue? How can I help you? How can I support you? What's your username? Can you make sure you give us login access? That very basic first point of contact.
Sure.
And as I said, I wasn't necessarily initially attracted by Salesforce. It was one of those things that happen in life. But then I saw that the platform it's a platform that you can deliver a lot of things really fast, and you can deliver value fast. And then
Yeah.
I got a bit interested, and decided to start studying more and learning more about the platform.
Sure. So then, so going from answering basic support requests and being that first point of contact, like how did your role develop to becoming a developer?
So I started learning basically Salesforce through documentation. That was before the time of Trailhead. That was just when you had the documentation manuals in the Salesforce websites. And then I was just like reading a lot of them. And while I was doing that, I picked up by like one of those books that you pick up for free at the train station, Programming for Dummies.
Yeah.
And then I got one of those. It was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for Dummies. I was like, this looks interesting. Let me read this. And then I read that book, and then I read another book. I don't even remember. Like, it was something I understood kind of half, but I was like, this looks interesting. It sounds interesting. And then I did an online course, and then I was like, wow, this looks really, really cool. And then I got a very basic skill set, but then I knew Salesforce already that I was learning on the job. And then at the time I applied for a job at Aperio for an associate developer job.
Sure.
And they were very kind and gave me a chance.
Sure. Okay. And then you've never looked back.
And I never looked back. Yeah.
So obviously you were working on the Salesforce platform, kind of, that was all you were doing, right? You weren't doing anything outside of Salesforce at that time. So why did you look at other languages? Like, why were you interested in learning about broader development languages?
It was also one of those things that it started actually with a podcast. It was around 2015. I remember that because I was really happy with my career, and I had moved from doing triage calls to leading some small projects in a period, but I was leading small teams, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm developing a lot. Look how much I'm learning, having conversations with management about going to a senior role. And I was like, wow, I moved from doing triage jobs to doing like development as a senior person. I felt like so that I knew a lot.
Sure.
And then at the time I was looking for a Salesforce podcast. I was like, let me see what's out there in the Salesforce world, because I really enjoyed podcasts. And it was a podcast called Good Day, Sir. And it opened my eyes to everything I didn't know. So the hosts, the guys are called John and Jeremy, and they are very seasoned sales software engineers working with Salesforce for a long time. And they often highlight the areas of Salesforce that lag behind. And I was very confused, to be honest. I was like, I don't know if these guys don't know how to use Salesforce. What are they talking about?
Yeah.
And isn't Salesforce the greatest metadata-driven platform out there? Is like all this stuff that we hear. And I just like, I kind of ignored them, but I had that in the back of my mind. And when I look back, they probably influenced me a lot without realizing in my career, more than a lot of people, I'd say, because they kind of sparked that curiosity. And at the same time, that year was the year that Salesforce was selected the most dreaded technology to work with by developers. And I was like, what's up? Like, what are people saying about this technology? This technology is wonderful.
Yeah.
But then I was too perplexed, and I started looking out there. Let me see what's out there. Let me look into other programming languages. And I started with some JavaScript and some doing a bit of more on the back end of JavaScript. And I felt like my eyes were open. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I got really like, okay, let me pause this Salesforce stuff and let me learn what's going on out there. And I felt like such an imposter, because for a while I was like, look at me being a big senior here. Look at how I'm growing. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm just repeating the Salesforce mantra. I'm just saying what Salesforce is saying, and let me see it. It was quite eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. So do you feel that like taking that step and actually looking outside of Salesforce made you a better Salesforce developer?
It definitely did. It definitely did, because I think what it did, it gave me perspective, and to see Salesforce as a tool, not the only tool. I think we as a Salesforce industry tend to only think in Salesforce terms, and just like, I've been to many workshops and many conversations with other Salesforce professionals that the first thing a customer would say, oh, I'm trying to solve this problem. And somebody would say, oh, you can do this with Flow. They barely heard the problem and ask questions about the problem, and they're already suggesting a Salesforce solution.
Yeah.
Kind of open my mind to see, okay, but then what if we combine a few things, take something that would run really well on AWS on a different technology, and then match that with Salesforce? And that can be a really sweet spot working with Salesforce, because Salesforce is really good for some things. It's extremely good for some things, and it's terrible for others. And it's really good to know the balance. It's like when to choose Salesforce and kind of make the kind of, if you look at a spectrum where Salesforce is extremely good and terrible for a few things, and it's like, where does your solution sit and how do you mix and match with what's available out there?
Sure, sure. So when we first came into contact, I had a client in Australia. They were looking for a strong Salesforce engineer. Which, as soon as I see Salesforce engineer, I think, oh, great, I'm in trouble here, because that's often not what we find when we speak to the Salesforce development market, like true software engineers. But they were looking for a software engineer, strong Salesforce skills, and amongst other things, experience building microservices in Node.js. And I didn't have a pool of candidates locally that had done that. There would be a very few that would put their hand up to have done something like that. So I was quite fortunate that then we came in contact. But why do you think more Salesforce developers haven't done what you've done and broadened their skill set outside of just Salesforce?
I think when I've asked myself that question all the time, and I think it's a lot of things, to be honest. I think it's a combination of several aspects of what goes on in industry. So one of the things that I would say is that the way that people Railhead, I find it an extremely good tool, but there's a bit of a badge chasing culture of let's just get many badges and not necessarily learn with it. I've seen that a lot, or the same thing with certifications. I can't speak for everyone and I can't generalize that everyone does that, but I kind of see that somewhere. Like, I've participated on the few Trailhead events and it's just, let's see who can get 20 badges today, let's see who can get 30, and like, what's the goal with that? And I see some people that are 5-time rangers, 4-time rangers, and what does that say? Like, does that say you've been very experienced and worked a lot, or does it say that you just sat down and just did a bunch of trailheads? It's
Sure,
a bit of same thing with certification. I see some articles that say you can get certified 5 times in one day or 7 times in a month, and I'm like, I look at that and I see a bit of a culture that is like, it's more the quantity than the quality.
sure.
I also see that it's a huge, it's a huge platform. So because it's a huge platform, there is so much to keep us busy. It's very hard to look beyond. Even working with Salesforce, when I decided to look out and do things that are not Salesforce related, I know I miss a lot. Sometimes somebody shows me something, I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And that was 3-4 releases ago, but I was so busy learning something else. It's very hard to
Sure.
keep track of it. And there is also a bit of a culture, which I find it a bit negative, this whole idea of the CTA role, because I think, like, I disagree that the CTA is on the top of the pyramid, to be honest. Like, and that's how they describe it, because you can be a highly skilled consultant, an admin, or a developer, and they should be standing at the same level as a CTA. Like, you can be very good in what you do, because these roles are complementary. And if you are going to be very successful in a project, it's not about somebody who's at the top of the pyramid. We're all striving to be the best we can be. So I
Sure.
kind of agree with that mentality of let's just become CTAs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's been something I've spoken about before, because I think so many people that we speak to, that's just their end goal, and they don't necessarily know why. Like, I think that they don't know, well, what actually am I going to be if I become a CTA? What will that even mean for me, other than having the title? And it's a massive achievement, obviously, but I think people need to understand, well, what are they going to do when they get there, and what does that enable them to do for their career, and because it's not right for everyone, right? I think there are lots of people we speak to, and I'm not technical, but I can kind of gauge that they're not where they think they are in terms of being that close to being a CTA. But they might take the wrong career decisions because they think that's the most important thing, to be a CTA, where they could actually become just a really, really good developer.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes I think about becoming a CTA, to be honest with you. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's like, what I've looked at it as like, oh, why would I become a CTA? It's like, yeah, pays really well. And like, kind of stops there. Because developer, I really enjoyed the like technical books and like much more the technical than the people side of things.
Sure.
And like, and I'm true to myself. It's like, yeah, other than the money, it doesn't attract me.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, and I think people should ask themselves that question. Why do you want to become not just a CTA? If you want to become an admin, why? Like, what does it attract you in that role?
Yeah.
And kind of find your role based on that.
Yeah, that's so true, because we get a lot of people that will say, "Look, my partner or my friend, I'm trying to encourage them to become a Salesforce professional." But I think you have to have that passion to do it, right? Like, you're obviously very passionate about development and writing good quality code. I don't think people can just, if you don't have that passion, it's going to be hard to become a good developer, right? Just because developer roles pay well doesn't mean it's right for everyone if you can't find the passion for writing good quality code.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think if I was to become a CTA, I would go crazy with the meetings with everyone just trying. It's just like that's not going to bring me energy or happiness.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I on this podcast we are quite often very we talk a lot about, how great Salesforce is, because this is the market we play in, and a lot of the people we speak to genuinely do love the platform and the Ohana and the whole ecosystem. But what are some of your frustrations with the platform? Not so much the certifications or Trailhead, but as a true software engineer, like, what are the frustrations with the Salesforce platform?
You sure you want to open the door?
Let's keep it to a couple.
I think Salesforce sometimes is a platform that you spend a lot of time solving accidental complexity instead of essential complexity. And what I mean by that is sometimes you're trying to solve workarounds that Salesforce itself should have solved already, because their APIs might be one of their APIs may be quite quirky, or you have some functionality with DX that doesn't quite work and you don't understand why. You have a lot of like examples like that. It's some deployments that are really difficult to deploy. You need a lot of manual steps instead of the essential complexity of your business in delivering business value to my users, making sure that the customers, both internal and external, are happy. You do have a little bit of that. And then you have this whole not clicks, not code approach at the same time, where it's not really the right tool for the job approach. It's kind of like it's this culture that code is something you need as a last resort, when it's clicks and code, whatever is the right tool to solve the problem in the best way, given a business problem.
Sure.
So do you have a little bit of that? And I also have a little bit of frustration with the fact that Salesforce is a company that charges 200-300 euros per user per month.
You're going to have to start speaking dollars now.
Dollars, oof. $400, $500. and lots of customers in for years, like in different cloud computing models. It's pay per use, and in Salesforce you might get a 3 or 5 year contract, and you're locked in paying these huge contracts. And we get promises as customers that is a very integrated platform that works really well, and it's not quite true. There are some parts of Salesforce that do work super well, and that's why Salesforce is strong. But there are some parts that are really quirky and it's difficult to work with. And you have these CIOs and CTOs saying to developers, "Why is this taking so long? This is the best platform in the world." And you have a little bit of a mismatch of expectations there.
Sure.
And I would love to see Salesforce fix those problems, and they've been doing that for a while. I just want to recognize some people. You have guys like Chris Peterson, Wade Wagner, Andy Fawcett, and some other amazing guys and girls doing a really amazing effort to improve what's going on. They've improved so much in the last couple of years. And to be honest, it has been what has kept me around, because I'm like, okay, I can see Salesforce is moving in the right direction. There is still a long way to go, but I can see that Salesforce is doing the right things. And you can see already that the market is shifting. I thought you said something that was interesting when you say a job opening for a Salesforce engineer versus for a Salesforce technical consultant. I've seen the market kind of changing as well, that Salesforce doesn't fall as much under the head of marketing, and it tends to fall more towards the CTO. So the expectations of the technology have changed. You have this like, okay, we need to get this technology a bit better. We need to get this like everything else that is going on in the market. Why can't we deploy fast? Why can't we have repeatable deployments? And Salesforce is doing its best to improve. So
Yeah, and that's something I've seen as well. Like, I mean, I've only been in the ecosystem for 5 years, but I definitely I've seen that shift from it being a product that sits in sales or marketing to now being quite often driven by like an engineering manager or a CTO, like you said, and that's where we see the most difficult requirements to fill because they do have a greater expectation from their team around technology skills. Um, I also just wanted to get back to one of the points you made around it's clicks and code and not just clicks not code, right? So how do you stop though a developer, because you are a developer, right? How do you stop a developer just building things that are already built? If How do you stop them kind of coding when it's not really required if that's all they know?
I think that's a different side of the coin. Like, I think developers very often tend to just say, I know you can do this in a standard way, but I can do it in code. And like very often I can do better. And it's like not quite like that. You have a little bit of, you do have, when you are on the other side, to say, hey, let's agree on some conventions. Let's not solve what has solved already.
Yeah,
But really investigating that it has been solved. Very often in Salesforce, there is a solution that is with clicks, and you say, hey, they already have a solution, and a solution. How much of the requirements does it check against what the business has required?
sure.
And then if it's like, if you're talking about 80% of the requirements, then let's push towards that and have a conversation with the business. And versus, okay, let's build it ourselves. It only matches 30% of the requirements, but you do need to get developers that kind of push back on business and understand the platform as well.
Yeah,
So I think I would say for everyone who's a developer who's not working in Salesforce, who's not really willing to have as much interaction with the business, to reconsider, because I can't speak for every company, but it has been my experience that when you're a developer in Salesforce, you do have a lot of, let's sit down with the business and understand a bit more. You do have a little bit of business skills a bit, and soft skills a
yeah, yeah.
little bit. So
And you really enjoy back-end development.
yeah.
Like, I think that's come through in all of my conversations with you. Is like you're passionate about back-end, but do you think a Salesforce developer should be front and back end?
I think it really depends. Like, if a company does exclusively Salesforce development, if you're working, or a developer is doing exclusively Salesforce development, I think I think you could definitely say, I do only the front end and I can only do the back end. But I think depending on the company, that your work might be limited. But I never really believe in that idea of, I only do one thing, I only do front end or back end. It's like, at least being aware of the different moving parts, especially in a platform that like Salesforce, because you have a lot of like moving parts inside of Salesforce. So I would say at least be aware of it. I wouldn't say it's impossible to focus on just one, as back end and front end tend to sometimes be very complicated. But I've seen it being a bit more limited if you're just focusing on Salesforce.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you're Brazilian. You've worked in Ireland. Your last role was in Holland. And I guess Holland is probably the most relevant for us to discuss because that's where you've spent most of your Salesforce time, if I believe, or that's where you've got the most knowledge of the market, at least most up to date knowledge. So can you tell us a bit about what the market is like there?
The market is basically, you have the big consulting firms, just they kind of rule in the market in Holland. Then you have some niche players, but they're not as big. What I've seen happening in the last 3.5 years that I lived in Holland, you see that one of the niche consulting firms start growing, they get acquired by somebody else, and then they just become part of either Accenture or Deloitte or wherever, one of those big consulting firms. In terms of finding people, is quite hard, which I think it's one of the factors that probably contributes to the level of the technical level of people, because very often projects are going on. You need to find a technical person. It's very hard to find a technical person. You have a technical person who's not very strong, but at least can do more than just training somebody from scratch. So it's a market that it's very hard, very challenging to find people, especially strong technical people.
Mm-hmm.
But in my experience, it's not a very technical market compared to, for instance, Dublin or London. I had an experience that Dublin and London were more technical than Holland,
In the
especially,
projects seem to be more technical.
or at least more talking about content on meetups. I remember, like, in the very
Okay,
beginning, I used to participate more in the either Dublin, London, or when I was in London, or in Amsterdam. I would see that the level of the meetups and the conversations and the technical, the professionals that would participate, that I would get in touch with, they were more on the admin side, more consultancy side.
sure. Okay. And what about is everyone contracting there, or are most roles permanent?
I think I would say it's very similar to what you described previously here, that everyone wants to just jump into contracting. The difference in salary in Holland can be 3-4 times what you earn versus permanent, so it's quite different. So it's very attractive to be a contractor in Holland, and very often people just kind of jump and just to say, I want to be a contractor because
Sure.
you earn so much more.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a global challenge right now because of the demand for Salesforce professionals. So yeah, that makes sense. So another topic I wanted to discuss with you is a real hot topic at the moment because it's got nothing to do with Salesforce, but obviously we're in a current crisis, and everyone's working from home. You've been in the country for 3 or so weeks now, maybe 4. You haven't worked a day at all from an office. You've been working from home 100% of the time. Your whole onboarding experience was done remotely. How was that, and what kind of tips and advice would you have for other companies that, because everyone's going to be in this boat, right, where anyone that joins a company is now going to onboard remotely? What have you learned from the last few weeks around doing that properly?
I think my employer did it like super well. They did an amazing job, and I think I would say other companies should do what they did. So just make sure that if you get a new person, get them the gear they need. So if they need a laptop, and they will need a laptop, but if they need a monitor, make sure they get a monitor, to make sure that they have everything. If they need a chair, make sure they can get that, because we are in a bit of a period that it's like, are we going to invest in a home office or not? If you as employee can get as much as you can to make sure that new person comes in and they feel like they are being part of the company, they're being cared for. It feels really nice to, it's like, oh, they actually brought stuff here. They made me feel like I'm part of the company, even though I'm not seeing anyone.
Yeah,
And that was really nice of them. And just like little details, like I got a packet of Tin Tams, 2 packets of Tin Tams. It's really nice. Like detail, like, welcome to Australia, this is something we eat here. I think those like little details really help. They make it very personal in the whole interaction.
sure.
um, I would say, other than getting the gear you need, don't be cheap on the gear. So don't get crappy monitors because it's a hard time. Like, make sure it's pleasant to work. If the work experience in the office is good, don't make sure that the work experience at home is also good.
Yeah,
Um, I would say invest in reliable tools as well. So it is a time that we kind of have to move fast, but good video conferencing apps, not conferencing apps with a time limit. Make sure you can sit on a call without a problem. You can, if you use Slack, if you don't use Slack, use some kind of chat based application, some way you can communicate fast with people, but at the same time, set expectations. I think our CEO has been really nice. He's been saying, we know you have to be home with the kids, and we know it's a bit more difficult. You don't have to reply straight away. If you have to go to the shop, just go to the shop. We're not expecting everyone to be available all the time, and it's
sure.
fine if you don't feel fine.
Yeah,
um, and also check in often. Make sure you're asking the person, hey, how's it going? Do you have enough work? Can I help you with anything? And are you okay? How is your family? Like, because we are in a very strange period that we as society, we're going through this kind of collective difficult time. It's not like I'm going through something hard and it's kind of me or just me and my family. It's like the whole
yeah,
world is experienced this new hardship, whatever you want to
yeah,
call
for
it.
sure.
Yeah.
And
So
you mentioned, because obviously you've never actually met any of your team, because everything was done remotely. Even your interviews when you were in Holland coming to Australia. So obviously they've dropped stuff off to you now, so you have physically seen your team or some of your team members. But how did you get to know the team in the first week and like actually get to build relationships with people that you'd never met before?
I was very fortunate. The team was super welcoming, and we've been doing virtual coffees pretty much every day, a couple of times a day. The same way we would walk together to the coffee machine, just say, "Hey, virtual coffee," kind of brew our own coffee, and then we
Yeah,
just sit together and chat about nothing or about work, like, but kind of like create that atmosphere that you have in the office. Because when you're in the office, you're not like sitting down working 100% of the time. You take breaks, you relax, you just kind of try to replicate that experience at home with your colleagues as well.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
Okay, cool. So when you are finally able to go out and explore Australia, I know you've wanted to move here for a while, and it's something that you probably never expected to be locked up in a house when you first arrived. So what are you most looking forward to about getting out and seeing some of Australia?
I can't wait to dive on the Great Barrier Reef. That has been a dream for a while, and I can't wait. I know it's not like just a bus ride here from Sydney, but that's the one thing I want to do.
Yeah.
Way to plan
Well,
that.
hopefully it won't be too long away. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But thanks so much for your time.
Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed the chat, and I think there's a lot of value in there for lots of different people. So both technical and non-technical, and also people out there that are looking to manage technical people. I think getting your insight around how developers think is also really interesting. So thank you very much. And if people want to communicate with you and ask you any advice or pick your brains, where's the best place for them to hit you up?
Just on LinkedIn, if you find me, Leo Alves, Alves, you can just ping me a message. If you want to get in Salesforce, if you're considering a career in Salesforce, I love getting people started in their career, just giving some advice that helps some people get started. Just send me a message. I'd love to have a coffee.
And
Coffee.
you're on Twitter as well. I see your Twitter post, which is where I first saw some of your frustrations with the Salesforce ecosystem. So is that a good place to find you still?
That's also a good place to find me. I gotta say, I never remember what my Twitter handle is. So it's let me just check this. It's Leo Felipe Alves. So
Nice.
if you
Cool. Well,
need
look, thanks so much.
anything,
Thank you very much. And yeah, we hopefully we'll see you out and about in Sydney soon. And yeah, good to chat.
thanks, Ben. Thanks so much for inviting me and getting me to Australia.
My pleasure.
Yeah. All right.